Yeah, hi, and welcome back. As you remember from last lecture, I want to make a couple comments on that before we move on. One is, it's the nature of social science to critique implicit assumptions. And this creates a problem, because part of our job is to tell people, hey, you ever think of looking at it this way? And people say, oh, okay, that's kind of neat. The problem with that approach is, it's fun to see things from a new angle. It's not fun revisiting things that you really believe in and you've never critically thought about and looking at that from a new angle. And of course, such as magic, religion, and witchcraft, it touches on sacred cows, that its core beliefs that you may have not even been aware of yourself. And all of a sudden, you're getting another slant, another point of view. And for some of you, for many of you, perhaps, you're thinking, hey, that's neat. But for others of you, it could be very disturbing. And that's the great conundrum of the liberal arts. In one level, you're critiquing society, so you're always looking at the hypocrisy. You're always looking at the contradictions. It's kind of like you're professionally trained to go that way. You say, you want to do this, but look how this is doing this and this. At the same time, liberal arts comes out of the preacher tradition. That is, it's designed to uphold a moral value, a moral framework. Now, this moral framework might not be Christian, it might not be Jews, it might not be Hindu, it might not be Buddhism, but it's certainly a moral framework. And when you begin to critique that particular framework, that also becomes uncomfortable. So what to do? Do you continue to talk in the platitudes, giving everyone a sense that this is a nice world and everything in it is nice? Or do you begin to critique the critiquers? Clearly, this approach in this course is I've taken the move on the edge. I think if you're going to critique everyone's values, you should also critique academics' values as well, because they're no different than anyone else, no better and no worse. They're just another group in society trying to make sense of it. In that sense, they're no different than you, your professors. They're just as scared of randomness. They're just as scared of improbable moments. And they need to explain suffering just as much as you do. Which now leads us to magic. Did you know that most of your professors have in their office a roulette wheel? And then if you want to challenge your grade, they'll spin it, double or nothing? Try it. Let's go on to magic. What is magic? This is a very interesting question. It's gotten a lot of scholarly attention through the ages. It certainly is very popular. How many of you believe in magic? Right? Magic has many meanings, doesn't it? Remember that song, I Believe in Magic? Okay. You ever been in a relationship when the magic's gone? Okay. How do you get the magic back? What do we mean by magic? Now, before you give a definition, and you probably don't have one. If you're the typical student, you have no definition. It's a term you use. You know that it's probably not real, but there might be something to making it real, right? Okay, what's magic? To understand that, you first have to understand what is religion. I'm a little bit hard on the screen here, so don't panic. We're going to come to those words. What's religion? What's magic? What's science? Okay, let's go to religion. Remember, this whole course started off on religion. Remember? We're saying religion is the belief in something outside yourself. It's sometimes a belief in spirits or a belief in the supernatural. That is, things that you can't touch with the five senses, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, hearing, taste, that sort of thing. It's supernatural because it's not saying that it's phony. It's just in order to contact it, you need other means other than the five senses. That's all that is. Every culture in the world believes in some sense of supernatural. Now, not every individual in that culture, from the Pygmies to the Bushmen to America, not every individual believes in a supernatural. But as a group of people anywhere around the world, as society, everyone believes in some force that's greater than the five senses can contact. Given that, religion is an attempt to explain a meaning of life. It's a philosophical system. It talks about where the world came from, where you should be going, and it also explains suffering. Why do we suffer? Karma. We didn't obey God's law. God was angry at you. The spirits were angry. Your ancestors were angry. Your ancestors were happy. They blessed you. Okay, these are all things to explain suffering, and also, interesting enough, to explain fortune. We often need is explanations to explain why good things happen to us, particularly when they're real good compared to everyone else, as much as we need to explain why bad things. What is this? Humans are meaning-central animals. We need to make sense of our world, right? Religion is one effort to apply a system to do that. Doesn't mean religions are false. It just means looking at it from a social science position, you can critique some of the core properties that they all share. Okay, fine. Let's review. What's science? How does science differ from magic? And we got magic, religion, and science. Okay? What's science? Some of you might write down hypotheses. Okay, what does that mean? I know you got that in 8th grade. You put it down, got 2 points. What's hypotheses? Right? Okay. Well, testing something. Okay. Why are you testing something? Fundamental principle in, quote, science is that the world cannot be proven true. All you can really prove is it doesn't work. What's that mean? I thought science was truth. What's you're telling me here? The point is that in an absolute sense, you can never really prove anything is absolutely correct. You can just prove something is absolutely false. Right? So you cannot absolutely prove that this and this will always happen because you don't know. You take an assumption, given this happened all the time, this also will happen. So we put our faith in it until a better theory comes along. And that's the point. Science is always critiquing itself. It's not reaffirming, ideally now, because we all know academics tend to really embrace certain theories as if they're religion. That is, they have a religious conviction, they're no longer suspending it from it. But ideally, science is you can critique it. Religion is you believe. Science says, show me proof. Hypotheses are formulated to say, okay, if this is true, we should say this, this, and this. In many ways, all science is just a word to account for empirically testing and challenging theoretical assumptions. That's why every course, interesting enough, that you've taken in sociology, and I suspect anthropology, and certainly in psychology, always starts off with theory. Okay? You give the various theories, and then you give the test and the applications, and then you talk whether they're strong or weak correlations or absolutely proven false correlations. What's going on here? You're testing and critiquing a worldview. You're saying there is a world, but the posture towards it is not to believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. No. It's to be skeptical. You constantly want to go, do I believe in this? Where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Right? When you think of anthropomorphism, you might think, well, I never thought of that. But humans might have the capacity to project human meaning into things that don't have any volition, don't have any consciousness. Okay, now that I know about that, I'm going to be very skeptical of myself. I'm going to wonder, am I doing this or is it something else? What's the point? What's religion? What's science? Religion is founded on non-rational assumptions. Remember, non-rational doesn't mean irrational, it just means take it for granted, fundamental assumptions. And once you accept those, there's a logic to it, correct? Which is control it all. It follows it. Christ does it all. It follows that way. Okay? Karma does it all. It follows that way. So there's a logic to it, but how do you know there's a karma? How do you know there's a real Christ? How do you know there's really witches? Prove it to me. You can't. All you can do is say, I believe. Right? But prove to me that humans can't fly. You can do it real easy, can't you? Prove it to me dogs can't fly. Prove it to me that a bridge made of paper can't support a Mack truck. We can do that. And then not only can we just do it by making it, we can talk about the principles of stress and whatever, and we can give an explanation of why the paper bridge collapsed, by the steel didn't. Right? Looking at the World Trade Towers, we're trying to understand why all that solid steel came down so fast. Right? And there's elements of physics there. And we took at the physics principles that might be apparent, what happened, and then we can give an explanation to that. And another age, the Azanti would say, witches. Another age would say, God willed it. And by the way, it's very interesting because several fundamental Christian leaders in America said the World Trade Centers collapsed because God was punishing America for its sins. So you see the worldview, you assert it. Different takes on how you come in. Religion, you don't critique your fundamental assumptions. How many of you have been to church in your lives when the pastor or the priest or whoever was leading it, the rabbi in terms of a temple service, just said, you know, I really have doubts. How many people out there really believe that Jesus Christ is real? You ever been to that service? No. Why not? People don't go to church to critique whether or not their beliefs are real. They go to church to reinforce their beliefs are real. Okay? Science is a different posture towards that. Every day you go to your office, you read skeptically, ideally now, the newspaper, the articles, the magazines. When you're talking to colleagues, you're critiquing the critiquing. Okay? Science is ideally now based on the notion that everything on the table is worth wondering about and being suspicious of. Now, if you're doing real science, that means you're open to critiquing your own culture. You're even critiquing your own moral system in terms of what interest does it have, what are the new values coming into being. This is good science, but it's dangerous in the liberal arts because in biology and geology and engineering, they never critique the moral values of the society. They're critiquing something else. And liberal arts, you move another way. But to do good science, you should do that. Great, fine. Science is critiquing, it's moving, it's challenging ideally its own assumptions. Those many scientists sometimes are frightened of that and move away. Okay? Religion does not engage in self-critique. It grades in just assertion. So where's magic come in? We got science, religion, magic. Where's magic? Magic comes in where it's an idea or belief, or it's really not an explanation. This is important. Magic is not about explanation. It's just about a recipe for cause and effect. If you want this outcome, you do this. People who like magic, they're not very good explaining, well, how does it work? I don't know. I just know if you do this, this happens. Okay? So magic looks a little bit like science in an odd way. Okay, it's means to an end. But unlike science, it never critiques its own means. It just says, follow the recipe, you get the outcome. Mix this, mix that, mix this, you have it. Okay? For example, we're going to give a lot of examples on magic, but just to segue into this. In New Orleans, if you have your eye on someone and you want that person to love you, you can go into a drugstore. And not every drugstore has it, but you got to go over the counter. It's not over the counter. It's not sold in a box or something. You have to go behind the counter. And you ask for a mandrake root. And if you can cut that into the person's drink, and that person drinks it, the first person they see, they'll be absolutely in love with you. Now, how does it work? I don't know. Scientists would say, let's see if that really works, right? Did God do it? No, it has nothing with God. You just cut the mandrake root, she drinks it, looks at you, gone. Or he looks at you, because it's not gender specific. Try it. Did you know in Redondo Beach there's a magic shop, and for $95 you can buy this mandrake root? Okay. Now if you try it and it doesn't work, you're doing science. If you try it and it doesn't work and you think, oh, I just got the wrong route, went to the wrong place. You're not doing science, you're upholding magic. We'll return back to that power of believing, if you will. Okay, let's go on now. Now, bringing up magic, religion, and science. What is superstition? What's the difference between superstition and ritual? Okay, that indeed is critical. Because what you have, in ways, is we all engage in rituals. Rituals help us interact with humans in a more easier way. We even have our own personal rituals that help us prepare for social events. For example, we all know in athletics it's really important mentally to get into the game. So before every big game, all athletes will be in their own way really self-absorbed, thinking of the game. Golfers think this way, basketball thinkers think that way. Is that superstitious? What do you think? Is that superstitious? If before you take an exam, you get up and have a big breakfast, you don't do this every day, but you only do it when there's a big exam and you have 2 cups of coffee. Huh? Is that superstitious? No. Why? It's a ritual. Are you trying to get an outcome? Yes. Is there some explanation to that outcome that's effective? The answer is no. This is the critical point. Yes. If you do things and we can ground it to another body of knowledge that tells us in some sense that this is an effective outcome, we tend to call that not superstitious, but just effective learning. We know that mentally preparing yourself heightens the body and it does lead to an effective outcome. Having a good breakfast, even having caffeine as a stimulant, helps you push on to have an effective outcome. Right? When is it superstitious then? It's when you do many things or just a little thing and it has no real effect on that outcome. We know there's a relationship between good nutrition and effective performance. We know there's a relationship to mentally focusing and effective performance. How do we know that? Because we've done lots of studies on different ways and we can explain how that works. Going back to science, right? We're critiquing the assumption and we can give an explanation. But remember, magic and superstition doesn't give an explanation of why it works. It just says, do this and you get that. So then we can come along, because people engaging it don't do this, and we can say, is this true or not? Let's look at this. They're making this claim. Does this do this, right? Superstitious. What do we have here? It's superstitious, for example. Let me give you some examples. Wade Boggs, the baseball player, just got inducted to the Hall of Fame. 3,000 hits, Boston Red Sox. You don't have to know the name. Get the example. Just a baseball player. Every day of his professional life, he ate chicken. He was absolutely convinced the reason why he was a lifetime 300 hitter was because every day he ate chicken. Okay? Now, is that true? Does eating chicken every day before a baseball game make you a lifetime 320 hitter? What do you think? How do we know that's not true? Because look, only 20% of baseball players hit over 300. So why doesn't everybody eat chicken and we'd have everybody hitting over 300 and we know that's not it? Now clearly to Wade Boggs, he was absolutely convinced. If I eat chicken, I will have the outcome of effective hitting. Now that's not really a waste of energy. Chicken's not bad for you. But anyways, he also came out with a book, by the way, because you might think kind of bland every day of your life to eat chicken, and it was like 1,001 ways to cook chicken. So he obviously recognized it was a little bland and he compensated, which is interesting because it just had to be chicken. It didn't have to be how it had to be cooked. Let's take Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells is one of the more better football coaches, retired, coming back, retired. And when he coached for the San Francisco Giants, he had this ritual. Before every game on Sunday, remember it's professional football, Sunday games, he would get up in the morning, game generally started, say at 1 o'clock. He would get up every day at the same time. Well, that's fine, mental preparation, right? What did he do? He went to Dunkin' Donuts to have a jelly donut and a cup of coffee. Okay? Then he would drive 12 miles the opposite way to another Dunkin' Donut and have a glazed donut and a cup of coffee. He was absolutely convinced that if he didn't have the jelly donut followed by that in a different Dunkin' Donuts, he couldn't go to Krispy Kreme. That would be bad, right? And he couldn't have 2 cups of coffee at 2 places. That would be bad. He only have 1 cup of coffee, 12 miles away, and then his team would win. Okay? Now notice the difference. It moves from just getting up with a good breakfast and coffee to mentally focusing, because clearly he's also thinking about the game. But when we start going 12 miles away, jelly followed by glaze, only 1 cup of coffee, he's really thinking he's affecting the outcome. This is like a ritual that in some sense is going to affect the game, right? Now, it's not that it's going to make him mentally sharper. He's just going to, the events of the game will unfold, events that he cannot foresee. And by doing this, the forces will be with him. But notice, it's not religion because it's not grounded in any theology. It's not science because he's not saying, I wonder one day, let me just gamble today and go to Krispy Kreme, right? He doesn't want to break the thing. George Schieffer, who's now the head coach of the California Panthers, you don't have to know these names, but he used to be the San Francisco 49er coach, and his ritual was he would never leave. He'd always had to be the last one out of the locker room when they had played home games in the Bay Area. Okay, he was absolutely convinced. It wasn't that he was the last one out greeting all his players and saying, go, 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 right? That would make sense from we understand of social psychology, of encouragement and that. That would not be superstitious. He was just believing it had nothing to do unless everyone left, and then he was the last one there, and then after everyone had gone, he merged out. And it wasn't that he was doing mental preparation that last 5 minutes that he thought it. He thought it's just that very effect would have outcomes on the game that he himself could not imagine. Do you see where this moves now from ritual preparation into superstition? What makes a superstition and not just sound social psychology is we can test this and we know that has no implication. Other people could do the same thing and nothing would happen, right? And we know that. The San Francisco 49ers, when they had Montana and Steve Young, and Jerry Rice, they won most of the games because they just had the best football team on the field. It had nothing to do with Schieffer coming out last. And we know that, okay? Because it can be replicated in different ways. Okay, let me go on a little bit more. What about basketball? Basketball players, interesting enough, are incredibly superstitious. But baseball players are more so. Before we go to baseball, let me ask you basketball. When is a basketball player most likely to be superstitious? When he's taking the important shot in the game, maybe the last 3 seconds. You know, if you think about it, generally the last 3 seconds is happening so fast you're not even aware of it. In some ways, it's better you have less pressure to make a desperation 3-pointer than you do a 10-footer where you're all alone, right? Okay? Actually, it's not. It's the foul line. Why does the foul line a basketball player most superstitious? No one's guarding him. No one can talk to him. Everyone's quiet. Fans can make something, but players, right? He's all alone. And that's the point. He's all alone. He's at the line. Everyone's looking at him. He should make those shots. And he's scared. He's anxious. He can't predict the future. Okay? An inability to predict the future, then, he tries to compensate by doing things. Dennis Johnson of the Boston Celtics used to bounce the ball at the line for every year he was in the NBA. Now, bouncing the ball does relieve anxiety. But Johnson was convinced that 6 bounces wasn't enough. So he went 6th, and then his 7th year was 7 times 8, and then his 13th year go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 13. See, and it almost becomes even anxiety producing to make sure you get the right number of years, because he was absolutely convinced that it was the number of bounces to the relationship to the league that made the shot go in. It wasn't his practicing. Of course, that helped, but this was the final edge. So we move away from anxiety reducing, which bouncing does do, to going to something more rigid, and that other rigid dimension becomes superstitious. Let's go to what is magic then. Okay? And why does it arise? Okay, magic is an attempt to manipulate an outcome without at all caring about why it happens or giving an explanation for why these systems come together. And there are 2 types of magic. And a man by the 19th century thinker by the name of Fraser wrote a book called The Golden Bow, and it was a wonderful book that people have often, it's 1,000 pages because he wrote everything once and never rewrote it, so there's an incredible amount of redundancy in it. But he came up with an interesting typology to explain types of magic that kind of holds up today. And he says there's sympathetic magic and contagious magic. And he says, what is sympathetic magic? Sympathetic magic is when like produces like. Now, what does that mean, like produces like? Okay. Remember, it's sympathetic and contagious. No one talks about that except Fraser in his book, and now you can see it in introductory intro text, and you yourself won't talk about it. But you will understand what like means, and like produces like. It means if something has the resemblance of something else, it will influence that. For example, if you want to stop a nosebleed, what do? Well, you can put a handkerchief on it, put pressure, blood vessels fill up, stops bleeding. Okay, that's an explanation. That's a good explanation. In contagious magic, that's not right. You have to use a red handkerchief. Why red? Because red blood, red handkerchief, the two coming together will stop the nosebleed. Now, we know it's magic or superstitious because a white handkerchief will do the same thing. If we test it with 1,000 people, we would find the same thing. But a lot of people will insist, no, a red handkerchief is needed. What happens if you get brain cancer? Well, we have chemotherapy, really nasty in terms of high dose of radiation to try to kill the cancer cells. If you're into sympathetic magic, you would eat walnuts. Why? You ever break open a walnut? What's it look like? It looks like a little brain, doesn't it? So if you want protection, eat a little brain will heal a brain. See how the sympathetic is? Like produces like. Now think of homeopathic magic. Homeopathic magic is big time in health food stores. I would not at all be surprised, and I'm sure I'm going to get letters on this, but I'm going to tell you anyways, is that it is really founded on a fundamental typology of magic. It's based on the notion that like produces like. Now, you really believe it's scientific, it's empirical. If you take this type of ingredients, you'll have this cure and this basis, okay? But if you look at all that overall, you would really be wrong, okay? Homeopathic practices is based on a sympathetic magic. It does not really critique or examine in any way its underlying assumptions. It's just do this and you will do that. Let me give you another example, if I can find it here among my papers, of homeopathic magic. If you have a fever, what should you eat? Hot foods, cold foods? You're all saying hot foods. Yeah. Why? Hot, fever, crosses one out. Okay? Now, if you have a fever, fluids are good for you. Whether they're hot fluids or cold fluids, it doesn't matter. Right? We know that. It keeps things opening up and the body will heal itself. But why the notion of hot to hot? If you're cold, you ever hear of frostbite? And someone says you have your hands are real cold and somebody rubs snow on your ice? Okay, cold to cold. And there's a notion of health implicit in this, but it's also based on certain magical principles. The idea of like produces like. And what makes it super... Now, sometimes this could be erroneous thinking. Right? Classic one. And most of you are going to believe in this. How do you get a cold? How? We just finished the flu season. What happens? Have you ever, as a young kid, go outside when it was maybe 60 degrees or 55 degrees? And people would say, what? Without a jacket, you'll catch a cold. Is that true? We all say it. Don't we believe it? We have news. Wrong. Now, if it gets below freezing and you go outside, you can get hypothermia. Absolutely. That's different, though. There you go. Your body shuts down because it's so cold and you die. Right? You don't get a cold, though. Right? If you go out when it's 55, 58 degrees, it might be a little chilly. You will not get hypothermia, and you will not get a cold. How do we get a cold? Cold comes from germs. It comes from things entering the nose or the mouth or the eyes in terms of that, and it comes from other people in terms of germs being passed on invisibly. Why do we think generally associated with the cold season? Because most people are indoor, the radiators turned higher, therefore warmer air, the germ bugs survive and float in the air much easier. That's why when we're more indoors, we're meeting more people, and the hot weather is keeping it going, and we're more apt to get colds during the winter than we are the summers. But the summers, there are also people who can get colds in the summers as well, but they just more concentrated. That's an empirical fact. And we do know that colds come about from germs, not at all from not wearing a sweater. So where did this notion come from? It's a long folk belief, the idea that you'll catch a cold, not from germs, but from the cold itself, because like produces like. It predates germ theory. Remember, germ theory does not enter the American or Western European worldview until the 20th century. The idea you'll catch a cold, it predates that. When I was in China last year, people would get a cold and they'd say, I didn't wear enough clothes, or I went outside without my jacket to get the mail. That's how I got a cold. Okay? So we see this idea is not just Western European. Again, it's sympathetic magic, a sympathetic magic, because it's saying that like produces like. What's the other type of magic? Contagion. Okay. Fraser, when he was looking around the world in terms of types of superstition, remember what's a superstition? You're not critiquing it. It's a means to an end, and you don't know how it works or why it works. And we know it's superstition because we can go in and give an alternative explanation to it. But part of the other one is contact, and that is the notion that if you want to do something, you get properties of the person, and then you can do something to that person. Some cultures are so anxious that other people will get properties of their body. They don't want anybody to cut their hair. Or if they do, they take all their hair and they bury it, because if you can get part of that hair, you can do something. You can do a spell on them. Other people do, when they have to cut their nails, they put them in certain places. They don't throw them away any randomly, because someone else could take that and then do a spell on you. Okay, it's like with a contact. By the way, remember in the whole thing of the knights young and all those things on Lancelot and the jousting, that's also based on the principle of contact. Your favorite maiden lover would give her a scarf, and you would wear it around the neck, and not only was it a token of appreciation, but it was also a sense that somehow you were bonded. In some sense, you would get the good luck. And you'd get the good luck from this person, you would get that person. There was notions of contact, by the way, right up through Middle Ages, when there was a thing called the king's touch. This is fascinating. Some people sometimes had diseases of the scrotum, and the thought is that whoever was the ruling king in Europe, if he touched the scrotum, that his royal manna, his essence of his imperial being, so to speak, would just cure you. Okay, the king's touch, again, magical in the sense contact with that produced a desirable outcome. Now, we know that certainly wasn't true, but people believe that to be in a certain way. I've often thought you see contagious magic going on when people go to the Hard Rock Hotel and they look at the icons of Mick Jagger's guitar, or any famous rock group, and they have this sense that if I could have that guitar, something else would happen, or if I could touch that guitar, or if I could touch that clothes. You never notice why famous people, when they sell their stuff on eBay, it's outrageously sold? Is it because it was an aesthetic value? To get Jacqueline Kennedy's writing desk that was worth $200 or gone up to $1,000, and people were paying $50,000, people paying $100,000 for Marilyn Monroe's last wedding dress. Okay? What are they buying? Are they just buying history? There is that element, and if that's all, that makes sense. Okay? But they're buying something more, and that moves it away from just historical purchase. Remember, humans can have many motives, so there's no doubt there's a historical sense to it. But it's also very clear there's another motive going on, and that is a sense of contagion. I have contacted the essence of greatness, therefore I can also be great. Okay? It motivates much of what we do, these two types of thinking. You'd be wrong to think of it, they just existed in the Middle Ages, or they just existed in simple societies. You can see it in your own life. Be a wonderful thing to put in on your final exam, and maybe I will do that, is to have you write about a type of of magic that you yourself might believe in terms of example of contagious magic or sympathetic magic. The last thing, of course, on contagious magic is the idea of voodoo, which we'll be talking up very shortly. But voodoo is the notion you get an essence of the person, you make a doll that shapes that person, and then what you do to that doll, you do to that person. So you say, like produces like, in this case, contact. And it's really good if you can have some part of that doll, a boot, a little piece of hair, and you stick it on the made-up doll, and therefore then it's not just a made-up doll that's in the image, but really the essence of the person themselves. And that really gives you effervescence and power. So the belief was, again, what's the point in magic? You want an outcome. You don't want a theory, you just want an outcome. And when you're engaging in that, and particularly you're doing, but see, all of us might want an outcome. Your car breaks down. We don't want a theory about why it happens. I don't care. I just want my car to run. Okay? And we want the best means to the end. So we go to a good mechanic who does fix it. We walk out the door and it can go. Now, scientists could come in and explain it. The mechanic might not have an overall theory of it, but he knows if you do this and this, it works. That's not magical. Why is that not magical? They don't have a theory. It just means end. It's not magical because we know if you do the same thing every single time, you're going to have more or less the same outcome. We do know the other's magical or superstitious thinking because it's simply no relationship with hitting pins in a doll and something happening to somebody. Because if we took 10,000 people with dolls and we put 10,000 pins, very few people would be hurt, and those people who would be hurt would be the same 10,000 people in terms of percentages that had no voodoo doll. In other words, in a 10,000 group on any given month, 10,000 people will have something harmful from a lesser degree to a very serious degree happen to them. So maybe you have 1%. 1% had no voodoo doll would also be there. So there'd be no difference. If having a voodoo doll would have nothing. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Setting this up, magic, religion, and science. Why magic? Why do people believe in magic? Now we've hit it on it. Anxiety, right? You can't predict the future. Let's do an anthropology one, and then we'll go to baseball. Malinowski. Malinowski studied the Tropinder Islanders. That's a group down by Australia, just above Australia. And he noticed something. They lived in lagoons. Ever been to a Pacific island? Wonderful. You know, they're all found by volcanoes. Volcano goes high up, right, and then slowly lava, and then around it, microorganisms develop. And these microorganisms can only live in a certain depth because they need sunlight. And as the island begins to recede, the microorganism, in this case coral, which is alive, starts growing up to reach the sunlight. Right? And so in time, in a mature island, the volcanic island's up, it's sunk back, the coral is rose up around it. So you have this incredible reef going all the way around the island. Now, this is amazing because then you have the lagoons. In the lagoons, there's very seldom any sharks. Okay? They have fish, and there's very seldom any very big waves because they're all breaking out on the coral reefs, so to speak. And Malinowski noted that every time the Tropinders went out to fish in the lagoon, they just hopped in the boat, threw the net out, brought back some fish. No magic, no rituals, no prayers, just did it. But he noticed when anytime they went off to visit another island or went out for deep sea fishing, they would paddle out about a mile to the Great Barrier, to the reef. Once they got on the other side of the reef, the waves sometimes could be 7, 8, 12 feet high. And out there was great white sharks and other things. It was not unknown that people would not come back alive. And he noticed before they put their big canoe into the outer ocean, they would start engaging in all sorts of ritual chants, all sorts of speak. And they weren't praying, quote, to a god, so to speak. They were doing lots of little formular things in order to, what they helped was make them survive. And they thought if they repetition, people who did this had a greater chance of living than people who did not. Okay? In that sense, that was magical. It was based on repetition. We know it's superstitious because same people could do that 1,000 times and X number would drown and X number would not drown. So we know, in fact, that they were mistaken. But it helped them. It gave them peace of mind. So it did have a psychological benefit. It didn't necessarily going to protect them from the great white shark, but it made them maybe a little feel easier as they pedaled out. Okay? So magic to Malinowski arose when you couldn't predict the future. Let's take Gemelch in baseball magic. In baseball magic, George Gemelch wrote this incredible article when he looked at baseball and noticed, he used to be a minor league baseball player, so he would know this, and he noted that who was most magical? Who do you think? Guess. Catcher? Nah, not much. Outfielder? Very little, really. Who? Hitter? Yes. Who else? The pitcher. Why is the hitter and the pitcher the most superstitious? Now the hitter is interesting because when the baseball player is not a hitter, he's not superstitious. But when he goes up to hit, he is. So the outfielder is not superstitious in the outfield unless you're Ken Canseco, who can't catch a foul ball. For the people who don't follow baseball, he's famous for going after a ball that hit his head and bounced over the wall for a home run. He might have used magic, and that's the point. You use magic when you can't predict the outcome. The pitcher's job is to get the hitter out. The hitter's job is to get a hit. Both are living in uncertainty. Everybody's looking at them. Remember the basketball analogy, basketball example? So what do you find? You find all sorts of things that pitchers and baseball players do to overcome anxiety. So good. So we see magic coming about in some sense is to relieve anxiety. Let's go a little more in depth to this, into the psychology of magic. Now, you're all reading a book called, interesting enough, The Psychology of Magic. It's a hard book, but stay with it. Make sure you look in the discussion section of the certain chapters and sections that you need to read. You don't have to read all the book. I've already had that posted, so don't go, oh, remember you should have been reading the discussion all along. But I think it's a nice book for really attempting to come to grips why we see so much magical thinking in the modern world today. Why is the occult so popular today? And it's interesting, as the book noted, in 1965, there were 131 books on the occult. 131 books, 35 years ago. In 1994, you find 2,858 books on the occult. What is going on? Clearly, in the world of science, in the world of emphasis on empiricism and on skeptical thinking, where you take classes and people say, think this way, not that way, the occult is live and well. Magical thinking is live and well. Why? His book is an attempt to answer that. And he argues there are two things going on here. One is that humans do not understand the power of coincidences and the law of probability. Let me say it again. It's important. The emotional and cognitive power of coincidence. What do we mean by coincidence? What's coincidence? Coincidence is when just random acts happening. I don't want to gross anyone out, but I want to make a point. Okay? You know that whole expression that stuff happens. All right? I chickened out. I didn't make the point. Humans are meaning-seeking animals. We want order and regulation in life. We don't want to believe life is random. We create all sorts of meaning systems to account for that. So one is, if we're anthropomorphizing, we're also giving an explanatory system that says there is no bad luck. For example, hey, did you hear about that woman who killed all those 5 kids? Crazy, isn't it? Yeah, that's the point. Was she a psychopath or was she insane? For the general public, it doesn't matter. We have an explanation. She was a psychopath, one of those real bad apples that you got to get rid of. We have an explanation, don't we? Or she was truly insane, and insane people do random things, and they're to be pitied but to be locked up because they can't be predicted. But you notice how we've gone with the power of it wasn't just, hey, every now and then someone might kill somebody. That's a scary thing. By the way, that's the same notion when you drive in a car. The amount of people that are killed every year, it's been the same for the last 20, 30 years. 40,000 people every year killed in a car. You know that. You got that in 16-year-old when you're taking high school. You wrote it down, you go, wow, that's a lot more than I thought, right? And you go about it. So what happens when someone dies? You go, what happened? person was going too fast. We give explanation. We don't want to go with luck. Luck has a hard time. It needs an explanation in a certain sense. Well, anyways, that idea of our denial of coincidence is just a part of life, that randomness could be a part of life. Now, philosophically, you can think of that. You can say, oh yeah, randomness is part of life. I really believe that. And we're talking philosophically. But in your everyday life, you don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe it. I don't believe it. You don't believe it. Okay? There's something in human beings that doesn't want to accept that coincidence is part of life. What's the other thing? Well, he notes, as a psychologist, operant conditioning, and that is that you just get habitual things. You get stimulus response. Remember that whole thing? I don't know if you've ever taken this in psychology. Stimulus response is you do something A and you get rewarded. And the classic thing was the pigeon. You rewarded the pigeon every time it turned left, and so it kept turning left and left and left until you had it going in a circle because it got rewarded. It didn't want to go in a circle. It didn't care if it went in a circle. It wanted the reward, and then it got fixated. You stopped giving the reward, and the pigeon forever went in a circle. Your dog does the same thing when it scratches itself this way and that way. It's kind of like it knows when doing those random acts that you take it for a walk, or you'd let it out to urinate. It can't talk to you. In fact, it's not even clear that it thinks by doing that it will get the expected outcome. And part of that association came about through operant conditioning in terms of how you stimulate a dog. Humans are more than dogs. Our brain power is clearly operating on self-reflecting properties, but we are also based in an animal, and there are certain things we do that operant conditioning as a psychological theory can explain very well. One of them is why we hold on to certain magical beliefs. Right? It helps us account for coincidence. What about probability? As you all know, living in Vegas, the gambler's fallacy is based on the notion that things work out. The longer you play at something, your number has to come up. But we also know that that's wrong. That in terms of a thing, you can flip a coin 50 times, and it doesn't mean the 51st time is going to be any more than the 50th, than the first time. But in the notion that things will work out, we know if I keep betting this, it has to come in. Now, sometimes it does come in. And now we get to selective belief. When it comes in, you forget all the times you've lost, and you remember the one time you've won. And many people taking this class work in the casino industries, and therefore you've seen in various of your jobs all the different things gamblers do. I often thought it would be a wonderful collective class article to write, since everyone works in different times and places, just to collect all the examples of what we would call magical rituals that are designed to have an outcome, that have nothing to do with mental preparation, nothing to do with preparing the body to perform, but just having to do with creating a lucky set of numbers to come up. We know it's superstition because it has absolutely no impact at all in terms of the desired outcome. One person once told me that he would only do blackjack with a dealer who wore a baseball cap. And so when he would go to the pit boss and he would say, would you mind sending over a dealer with a baseball hat? Now, wearing a baseball hat clearly has no impact at all on the flow of the cards. The house manager thought if the person felt content, he would go do that, okay? That's superstition. You all know people pounding on the machine, doing stuff. But what about students? Now, notice the problem of fallacy here is the randomness. If you keep playing a machine long enough, it's going to come up, right? But it's always going to come up after you've lost a certain amount to the house. So the house likes those odds so they can continue to go. You might thought, I just had a lucky streak. Okay? We're just using gambling here as one type of magic. But baseball players are the same thing. They have a problem with coincidence. They have a problem with randomness. And they want an edge. And when you go for their edge, you're trying to get an outcome. And therefore, it tends to go in terms of that belief. Human beings do not want to accept that coincidence and probability are part of their life. They want to believe there's a higher meaning. Okay? When life is uncertain, we generally employ an informal calculus of probability. Let me say that again. When a situation that you're in is uncertain, you then make kind of an informal, not very scientific, but you're trying to make some type of probability guess and a hunch. And then you're like the dog wanting to go out. You then become no different as you look for little things that you might have done leading up to the desired event, hoping if you do those again, the desired event will take place. And you might even, since you're smart, since human beings are really intelligent, they could say, one level, I think this probably won't have an impact. Another level, maybe it will. It'll give me an edge, and that's the thing. We get to the next component, is the illusion of control. When the Trobenders were doing those chants before they went out to the deep sea, it made them happy because it gave them an illusion that somehow they were controlling forces they had no control over. Fish, waves, angry seas, storms. Okay? Gambling again. What is the most addictive game? What is the most addictive game? Video poker or just random three-wheel slots? Video poker. Now, in terms of payout, they're really operating the same way, random. Right? Why does video poker become so addicting? Because of the illusion of control. You think, if I would have kept that card, if I would have thrown away the aces, maybe the royal would have come. I'm going to rework this. Okay? You think you're managing the machine. Now, in one level, you can read a book saying you're not managing the machine, okay? And you go, yeah, that makes sense to me, right? Then you get in, and you think you really are managing it. But here's the point. This is just not gambling. This follows the same thing. When you wanted, from a guy's point of view, when you wanted that girl to fall in love with you, you did the mandrake route, right? You had the illusion of control. You gave it to her. It wasn't all your anxiety, all your love and your yearnings, all that came out, but you couldn't control it. But having that sense, it gave you a little edge, or at least you suspected it. Okay? Now, there's one thing reading a fortune cookie is just fun. Okay? There's a whole other thing believing it's absolute truth. And by the way, real quick, fortune cookie should be called the American cookie because it never arose in China. It arose in America. By the way, you can buy it in Hong Kong. 3 years ago, restaurants would sell it to you for $1 if you wanted a fortune cookie. Except, interesting enough, they didn't call it a fortune cookie. They called it the American cookie. Let's go on a little bit. What happens when prophecy fails in terms of magical beliefs and religion? There was a group of people that believed in flying saucers were going to take them away. They sold everything. This was in Texas, 1957. By the way, the same thing could have been done with Heaven's Gate, mid-1990s. What happens when people absolutely believe in something and then it doesn't happen? Do you give up your belief or do you change it? An interesting study of this group all thought that on this particular day in 1957 that the earth would come to an end. They got all ready. They met at the house. They made their peace. 57 left, came and went. What did they do? Did they say, I lived a fraud. I was wrong. I now see the truth. I'm never going to be led away again. No. They continued to hold on to their belief. They just said they missed the date, and they continued that ideal. It's very interesting in the polygamous community that I studied. One group, it's broken into two factions, if you will. One faction thinks this is all nonsense. But this one particular faction really believed that when the year 2000 came, the earth would end and God would kill everyone on earth, including the bad polygamous, from their point of view, the bad polygamous community that was right across the road, and they would take all them up. And so several members met out in the field ready to go. 2000 came and went, January 1st. They're still there. Did that prove prophecy was wrong? No. What they said it was is that clearly there's members upon us that were in bad faith. The prophecy would have worked if everyone in this community had been righteous. But clearly we have people in this community who claim to be righteous, but they're not. Do you see how you can keep the belief and how you, in terms of mating, how you can continue believing it in terms of that fundamental assumption? Why do people believe in psychics? Okay. Mark Edwards, and it's a film I show every time, and we only have a couple minutes to really give you a critique, but he's an amazing performer, and he calls himself just a performer. And he comes right in and he starts asking questions, and he gets numbers, and he starts guessing about what people are, and he's blindfolded, and then he gets a lot of it right, and you're incredible, and he thinks, it's all in my mind, it's all in my mind. And then he stands back and explains how he does it. He says before he goes to town, he does research on a topic, say Indiana, and he realizes that in Indianapolis, 70% of the people drive Chevy trucks, and that the favorite dress is this type of dress, and most people live in this part of town. So when he says, I have a feeling, I think the truck you have is a Chevy truck. And they go, wow, how did you get that? I didn't know. Okay, not knowing this person's just using probability. And this is important. He says, sometimes he makes mistakes. He said, well, he often makes mistakes. And he says, the power wasn't with me, power wasn't with me. And this is his point, that it's really good to make some mistakes because it makes you even more genuine. Right? And you're not really aware of how much you're a cultural animal yourself. And you can make certain statements at certain times, and most people will have the same opinion. Okay? Fascinating, isn't it? You didn't know that psychics, before they went to town, did a whole census study on your community. So they knew that in asking an audience of 200, that 70 to 60% of that audience, never knowing them, would probably be in that way. And so just guessing and hunches, they can more or less get it right. And then there's a way of counting it. Edwards ends this wonderful little demonstration by saying, people want to believe. So even when I'm wrong, they say, remember the prophecy that fails? Okay, we just got the date wrong. Well, okay, he's really was good. The energy wasn't flowing right. He missed it a little bit. You want to believe because you want to believe there's forces in the universe that why science can't explain them and religion can't account for them. They are there, and by performing them in the correct way, you will get the right outcome. We have up on the screen vampires, but I'm going to save that to the next tape because we only have a minute and a half here. So I'm going to finish up on the magic, and then we'll take that right up at the top of the next hour. Good. So have I convinced you? Magic, religion, and science. Science is a skeptical posture where you're constantly saying, I wonder if that's true. This is important. One last 30 minutes. Psychics are often making predictions. They might make 1,000 predictions every year. Random guesses are going to get a couple right? You don't go back and look at the 1,000 and say, why did you get only 3 out of 997? You want to believe, you don't look at probability. Thank you.
If you are interested in this or any other UNLV distance education course, please call us at 702-895-0334.